The Midwife Crisis podcast will touch on sensitive topics regarding the human body, sexuality, pregnancy, and all aspects of women's health care, and it may not be suitable for all listeners. I'm PR.
And I'm Kate, and this is the Midwife Crisis podcast, Microsode, the podcast where you learn it's not just about you. This is where we answer listener emails, readdress previous episodes, and importantly, share our self-care.
Today, we have a very interesting question from a listener on our Instagram. They ask, "Hi, I would like to begin carrying pads," which we had a guest, Alvin, who is a midwifery student, who in the course of conversation told us that he carries sanitizer, wipes, surface wipes, and feminine products, feminine sanitary products in his backpack. So anyways, this person has no idea where to begin. Help, please. This may not have made that conversation that we had with Alvin. I don't think it was in the actual episode, but he's going to be an extraordinary midwife who is very considerate of the goodies that he carries and who he can help with them. And that includes period products.
Absolutely. So first of all, I love this so much. Some of you may have also seen there's a video being shared on social media of a cisgender male who has a basket of period products at his apartment. And he sort of talks about how he wants to be prepared for people who bleed when they're in his home. He wants them to feel comfortable. And I say people who bleed because more and more we're finally making space for people to affirm their genders, right? So you may not just have a female friend, but you may have a male friend or a non-binary friend who bleeds, and maybe you don't even know. If someone's been on T for a long time, and let's say they've had top surgery, you might not even realize when you're hanging out with them that this person at birth, was assigned a different gender than how they actually are. Mm-hmm. So, I have to say, I think that's really wonderful. And additionally, as someone who bleeds and has PCOS, which anyone out there who has PCOS or polycystic ovaries, you can't always predict when your bleeding's going to happen. And when you're not expecting Aunt Flo, she always comes knocking, and it can be totally distressing. So this talk about how we can be prepared and help other people, give them a little, helping hand, I think is beautiful.
And these are simple ways to just be inclusive to everyone. All of the populations that Kate was mentioning just a minute ago. So we're just going to go through some items, and if you would just be considerate and have a few on hand. I remember when my mom went through menopause and I was in need of some products. And I said, well, she was a tampon kind of gal. And I was like, do you have any? And she was like, girl, what for? I don't need that anymore. And I was thinking, because you have daughters and we need stuff sometimes. And she said, all gone. My mother is a purger. I'm just saying. So let's talk about some of the types of products that we kind of not advantage. I have to think in English. We assume that people are aware of or know how to use or whatever. And so we want to just go over everything, even the obvious. I want to talk about how far we've come, because when I got my period, people were using belts and pads, and there was a little belt, and you take a safety pin and you pin the pad to the belt and you put it on around your waist, and whatever all it was, I said, I can't do this. I can't do it. I can't do it. And so then my mom was like, well, here are some pads. Mm-hmm. And then there were some pads with wings. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, how about a tampon? How about I just hide it? So yeah, I think that's important. We've come a long way. And, my mother is talking about back in the day when they had to use like little pieces of cut up rag, and then you'd wash it out and you'd reuse it. Right. And, she's like, it's things are nice now that you can just tape this into your underwear. And I thought, it's a diaper and I don't want it. Can you please help me?
And things are nice now here. Not everywhere in the world do people have access to clean running water, let alone any kind of products, especially, definitely no, disposable products. And so for some people who bleed, they can't even go to school or they can't go to work or, leave their house because they don't have the ability to be able to bleed and be out in the world, Right. And I think that just is a side note, but should also
that's important.
Have everyone be aware that that's a real thing. It's sort of a luxury, and of course we get taxed for it like it's a luxury. Yeah. Man, what is that pink tax?
I don't think we should be taxed for that nor toilet paper. But anyway, I saw a documentary not long ago where they went into a community in I want to say it was India. Forgive me if I'm mistaken on that. And the women, they were talking to them about using hygiene products, and they were just kind of giggly and embarrassed. And these are women who, my understanding, had been using cloths and washing the cloth, or not participating in activities of daily living, or like going to school and that kind of thing, because when they had their period, they weren't allowed. They had to kind of be in hiding a little bit. And so once they got the hang of it, it was sort of a success story on introducing them to these products. And they were just like, we can do things. We can go places.
Yeah.
And so, it was
Let me side note say, too, that people associate a lot of times menstrual blood as being really dirty. And it's not. Guess what? The inside of your uterus is sterile. So it's sterile, and it's
and some of that has to do with culture and religious beliefs as well.
Yeah, absolutely, which, I can't specifically speak to in my own, but I just know that it's something that people get embarrassed about, and you don't need to be. If you would like to be, that's fine, but you don't need to be.
To this day, people are embarrassed to talk about that kind of stuff. If you just are in mixed company and a conversation, some folks are very comfortable and others are like, what are you talking about? Like, let's change the subject already. I discussed a little bit about, panty liners and pads and overnight pads. Now there is a plethora, as my young nephew used to like to say, of products that you can use that are satisfactory. And as Kate pointed out, in this country, yes, there is a plethora of all kinds of options. So if you're a heavy bleeder, you can put on an overnight pad that kind of goes up your backside if you use pads. Some folks have to use tampons and pads because of their flow. Some folks just use panty liners because they have a really light flow, just naturally so, or because they are using perhaps a hormone long-acting contraception, and so they don't have much bleeding or any bleeding at all.
Some have wings, which kind of like helps them stay in place and kind of covers over the side of your underwear. One thing I will say is you don't need anything scented. No, ma'am.
No.
If you feel like you need a scent to counteract your scent, you should go to your healthcare provider because you probably have a little overgrowth of bacteria or something. Blood in general, like it's blood, so when it oxidizes, when it hits the air, it's going to be, a little more fragrant. But, you shouldn't use anything that has, like a scent to it.
Sometimes you might find yourself in a situation where you haven't been able to change for a long period because of work or school or whatever. And it's really important at that point to address that issue. That's part of self-care. And so sometimes you will notice, probably you before other people, that there's some kind of a scent that anyone who has a period might be able to identify as, I smell period.
And that is one thing I always was frustrated in school when like a teacher would not allow someone to go to the bathroom. It's like, okay, but you can't do that because what if you have like diarrhea, or what if you're like, oh my God, I feel my period coming, and if I keep sitting here, I'm going to bleed through my pants.
Right.
Like it's not you're not to be judge and jury. And now I'm not saying people weren't naughty in the bathroom because I'm sure they were, but I mean, I think it needs to not be a big deal.
Yeah, I can't believe that it is still a big deal in certain.
I remember it being a big deal.
Places.
Yeah.
I went to an all-girls high school, and so it really wasn't. Naughty things were going on in the bathroom, but you had no problem getting there if you needed to get there because I think it's because we were all It was all female.
I still remember as a freshman in high school, my last class of the day was science, and I remember I left like a little early. Like the bell went off at like 2:15 or whatever, and I left at like 2:12 because I was like, I have to go like change my tampon. And the next day, in front of my whole class, my science teacher was like, and Amanda's got a detention today for leaving class like 3 minutes early or whatever. And I was like, I had my period.
Did you say that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure I did. And, you could see him just stick his foot right in his mouth. Like, first of all,
wow.
I dare you. I dare you.
Great.
I'm on my menses.
And you were brave. Yeah.
Well, of course I was. I was me. Anyway, so for our lovely listener, I think a simple, moderate, middle of the ground cotton pad is a great little thing to have, and it's pretty approachable for anyone.
For sure.
Anyone's going to be thankful for that.
Yeah, they'll be grateful just to be able to catch the flow.
Totally. So now we already talked about tampons a little bit, but I just wanted to mention a little bit more about tampons. So tampons, for people who may or may not know, are like a little piece of cotton that you put into your vagina, and you stick it up sort of far, I would say pretty close to your cervix. And they come in different types. So like when I was growing up in my house, we always had OB tampons, which were just a little, like just the tampon. There was no applicator. So I remember when I would go to like a friend's house and need a tampon, I'd be like, what am I supposed to do with this? Because why is it so long? Because I'd look at the tampon and be like, what is in here? And so the applicator is in order to help people, because sometimes if you're not having a heavy flow, you can meet a little resistance sometimes with the just cotton. And sometimes on those types of tampons, the way that they sort of expand is different. And so I think that they're easier just to get in with an applicator. And there's two different types of applicators. There's like a cardboard applicator, there's a plastic applicator, and then there's also actually something that's around now, which I think is so cool, which is a reusable applicator. So it's just like something you have to help you, get the tampon where it needs to go. Personally, I always found that my vagina wasn't a perfectly straight line to my cervix. And so for me, it was more hassle because I'd end up having to use my finger anyway. So I was like, might as well just wash my hands and just use my finger. And then also, it's so tiny, just a teeny tiny little thing that you can just palm in your pocket if you are feeling like you don't want to announce to the world, right, that you have your period. So, and tampons also come in different strengths and flow strengths. And the really important thing about tampons to remember is that you want to go with the lowest absorbency that you can.
Yes.
Because should you choose a really high absorbency when your flow's not really heavy, that extra absorption can make you sick, something that people sometimes think of, toxic shock syndrome. So it's actually quite rare. We really don't see it a lot.
It is very rare.
I can tell you that because how many times have you seen someone who left a tampon in and didn't know it and you had to retrieve it, right?
And they're fine. And they were afraid they were going to get toxic shock.
Right.
And no, basically what they got was a stinky tampon removed from their vagina.
Exactly. But so that's a little bit about tampons. So I would say as an approachable person who wants to have some products, those are probably the easiest to just kind of have around, would be like a kind of average tampon, an average pad.
You're not trying to supply your guests with every single option.
Exactly.
I have to give props to my mom because when I decided I wanted to use a tampon, I said, I don't know how this works. And she said, all right, I'm going to show you. Aww. Except she didn't have her period. And so she put it in and I'm like looking closely and I was like, okay. She's like, okay, now you try it. And I can't get it. I need to see it again. So she pulls it out and she puts in another one.
Oh my God.
And I was like, I'm not getting it. I don't know. It's just not working. I can't get it in. And it was really important for me for this particular incident. I was going to be in a bathing suit, a swimsuit fashion show. And I was modeling a bikini and I had my period. And so I said, I cannot go in there with whatever. One more time, she took it out and she put it in. And she was like, if you can't get it, I'm not going to be able to do this again because I don't even have my period. This thing is so dry. She's not a medical person. It didn't occur to her that maybe some lubricant would help.
Well, Vaseline or something.
She was like, I'm dying here. And so I want to give her some applause because she tried really hard. When I finally did get to do it, I put it in and I was like, I got it in. And I thought, why would people want to wear this? It's so uncomfortable. It wasn't all the way in.
Yeah.
It was only halfway in. And it was like, oh my goodness, this is killing me. Why? I don't even understand why she likes this, why anybody who uses this likes it. And so then I did it again, and still it wasn't in far enough. And a friend of mine's, I said, I'm so uncomfortable. And she says, why? And I said, this tampon situation. And she was like, what do you mean? What tampon situation? I said, it just hurts every step I take. She said, it's not all the way in. Push it in. Go push it in.
Right.
And I did. And it was like magic after that.
Yeah.
And so, and then I was a tampon girl.
And I know that for some people who've never used one, and I have patients of all ages that come in and they're like, oh, I haven't ever been able to. Try just with your finger first. Like wash your hands and then just try to insert your finger. Because again, maybe it's just that funky angle. It's something where it's getting caught up and you don't realize it's not in all the way. So, it's just like everything. It's a little bit about getting to know your own anatomy. But you will get there if you want to.
And I was trying to go straight, and my anatomy is such that my uterus is retroverted. So I needed to go in at an angle. And that made it, once I figured that out, also, it made it much easier. But I remember teaching my daughter and saying to her, well, this is what we're going to do first. And I had her look at herself and all that. And then I said, let's just put some lubricant and like magic. She was like, oh, yeah. And then I said to her, do you still need to use lubricant subsequently? And she was like, no. I know what I'm doing. I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine. And so it was just that initial time of trying to get it in. I hope she doesn't mind that I'm sharing that. But anyways, she's good.
So we were going to talk a little bit about some of the other really cool period products that are out there.
Oh, but before we do, let's talk about period panties.
Yeah.
Because that is the pair of panties that you have that you use when you have your period. Maybe it's an old ratty pair that used to be sexy, but now you don't want anyone to see. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just a pair of panties that you have that you're like, okay, these are my ugly ones compared to all the others. So you're going to have to be the period panties. Or it may be that they're dark so they don't show blood.
Or maybe it's the fit. Like if you're going to wear a pad, you want like a little bit of a snugger
fit.
Yeah.
Sure. And so people don't discuss having period panties, but we had period panties. And so it's a cool thing. It's the best. You don't ruin all of your clothes and your underwear and everything else by just being random. And before we get into the other methods, the other supplies, I wanted to know what you think about free bleeding.
Oh, yeah. So I think it's super interesting. I think so free bleeding is just basically where you just, wear anything. You're just like, this is what I got working with, and I'm just letting myself bleed. And, I think it's whatever people are comfortable doing. For me, I think it would drive me crazy. Like my only association with that is when my water was broken for like 30 hours and I was just leaking constantly and I just felt wet all the time. So I think that would drive me bananas personally. But I think the importance of visibility and the importance of showing like I am a person who bleeds. This is normal. This is not gross, and you can suck it is awesome.
I think the thing that troubles me most about it is I have a thing about ruining my clothes. So I don't like grease on my clothes. When I drop food and it's greasy and I can't get the stain out, I'm like, and then I just toss that aside.
So you'd be throwing away a lot of clothes.
So yeah, I'd be throwing away a lot of clothes, and that really, I feel like it's personal preference. Whatever you want to do is whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
But I don't like ruining clothes, and if you have to sit on furniture and stuff, and so you're kind of leaving a little of yourself behind.
So true. Did you want to talk about like menstrual cups and stuff like that?
Sure. Menstrual cups, like my diaphragm that I used once as a menstrual cup.
Listen, works, makes sense. Yeah.
And I was like, this is awesome. It's catching all my flow, and I'm going to have sex actually because I feel like it, and I don't, and it's nothing's coming out down there. I thought it was the bomb. I didn't use it for what it was, its purpose, because I had an IUD. But
And actually now they make menstrual discs, which are very similar to a diaphragm. It basically just has sort of a more rigid ring and a little sort of like cup shape underneath it that goes over your cervix, and it's no suction, and you can wear it to have sex. And, something, that people sometimes, again, are weird about is if they have their period, they're like, oh, I can't have sex. But you can.
You can if
sometimes
you want to.
It's better. There's some research that says that, if you have sex on your period, it can help alleviate cramps if you have an orgasm, stuff like that. So, I don't know, to each their own.
It is to each their own.
Yeah.
Don't ruin my sheets.
That's true.
Okay? I just have a thing. Here we go again with the stains. But yeah, it is to each their own. And I know someone who was always, she said it was great. She was always engaging in menstrual intercourse. And so if that's your thing, that's your thing. And if the sheet stains are your thing too, that's your thing. But it's not my thing. Menstrual cups are chalice shaped like a chalice, like in church, like a wine glass.
Yeah, like a wine
glass. Like the little glass. Silicone base, and they work by creating suction in the vagina.
So they don't go all the way up like the diaphragm or the menstrual disc or the tampon.
Right. So, and that's how they stay in. And that's how I've had to remove them from some people because they just couldn't. They were stemless, the ones that they use. So if you don't have a stem, you have nothing to grab on. You got to break suction, and they couldn't break the suction.
Well, it's slippery usually.
Right, the vacuum suction. So that's a plug for stemmed versus not. And it can be great for any flow if you're just having a little bit, or for heavy flow, or if you want to know how much you're bleeding. Especially sometimes you have that discussion with your provider, like, are you heavy? Do you bleed heavily, or do you just bleed a little bit? That's a way of kind of catching it and monitoring it. I mean, you don't have to save it or anything like that. And then you just kind of wash it when you're done. Just kind of soap it up and wash it and let it hang.
Yep.
Yeah, I went to someone's house recently. It was in the shower. And I was like...
That was totally where I would also take mine out and clean it and then put it back.
Yeah,
just like, whatever. One time, I might have already said this on the podcast, but one time I had one in its little bag, and I was like, oh, in case my period comes, and I stuck it in my scrubs at the hospital. And then I put my scrubs in the scrub machine, and I was like, oh no, my menstrual cup was in there. And I'm sure whoever works in the laundry at the hospital was like, what the actual hell, when they pulled out when they pulled out my menstrual cup.
Especially if they're not familiar with it.
I didn't call down and try to retrieve it. I cut my losses.
Oh, wow. You didn't call back and say, hey, I lost something very valuable in my scrubs. Do you mind having a look-see?
No. And I will just say, for me personally, I found that once I got really comfortable with them, and there is a learning curve. So I usually tell people, if you want to learn how to use a menstrual cup, do it when you're hanging around at home, so that if you have a little leak or something, you're not like, oh God, I'm at church or whatever.
Right.
I didn't like the stem because I felt like it almost would rub near my labia, and I was like, nope. So I cut that shiz right off. And
oh, cool.
But I think as a midwife,
but you're someone
and
who's comfortable,
right? Exactly.
I
could really get in there. I was like, it's not going anywhere. And all of these things, I will tell you, it's a dead end in there. So don't be scared that you're going to put something up and it's never going to come out.
It's going to wind up in your chest somewhere.
Right.
That's not going to happen because it ends blindly, and so you can't. That's not even possible.
Right.
The only thing that can get past there is sperm.
So true. And we already sort of talked about the menstrual disc. So then the last sort of item that, again, is not super widely used, but something that some people do like is sea sponges, or it's called a natural sea sponge, which is literally what it sounds like. It's a sponge that you stick up in your vagina, and it absorbs the blood, and you can rinse it and reuse it. And, a lot of these methods, I think people are approaching how can we be better for the environment? Because, as I was a cloth diaper mom, and I remember realizing afterwards, I'm trying so hard not to be putting lots of diapers into the earth, because that was my own personal journey that I needed to do. And I was like, and every time I put a panty liner or a pad, it's like a diaper. It is exactly the same thing. It's like a diaper. And so I started experimenting with alternate options. And that also brings us to very cool period underwear and period shorts and all these absorbent materials, different brands. Thinx If you want to sponsor us, I will take 1,000,000 pairs of those sleep shorts because I love them. But there's all different kinds of brands. And it's basically super thin, absorbent material that's in your underwear. So then you don't have to worry about your period underwear because these are your period underwear.
These are your period underwear.
And then you wash them. You throw them in the washing machine like no biggie.
That's
No
awesome.
harm, no foul.
Thanks for remembering to mention that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. As an answer to our friend that wants to be able to support women or people who bleed in this capacity, you don't have to go buy a sponge or have cups,
multiple size menstrual cups.
Yeah, or menstrual discs in your armamentum. But just a couple of pads and a couple of tampons would be really helpful if that is a situation that you might run into.
This just made me think of the movie, I think it's like late 90s or early 2000s, called Can't Hardly Wait. And it's about like a graduation party. And the Seth Green character has this backpack he wears the whole time. And he gets locked in a bathroom and you find out in the backpack is just all sex stuff. It's like 1,000 different types of condoms, lubes, like a French tickler, a vibrator. It's just like a full backpack full of sex stuff. So I'm now imagining this listener with a backpack just like exploding with every menstrual thing.
You don't want to displace what you need in your backpack,
right?
In support of us, of all of us types. But just like our friend Alvin, just a couple of things that are handy to just sort of.
And I'm
save
also
the day.
going to say this one thing: a trash can with a lid in your bathroom.
Yeah.
That would be fabulous because, again, as someone who's bleeding and is maybe embarrassed or at like a bachelor pad and they're like, what the heck do I do with my pad or whatever? That is a big thing
Waste
too.
more paper and roll it all up.
Right.
That's what you're basically doing when you have an open can.
Yeah.
You don't want people seeing
and you
all that.
definitely don't want to flush it. Do not flush a menstrual pad.
Don't flush it even once because you don't know how many people before you may have had the same idea. And the next thing you know, that person's going to have a plugged toilet.
Oh my God. That's like that SNL skit with Adam Driver and the sleepover with the girls. And you find out all the girls have been flushing their pads.
Yes. And the toilet stopped up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
That was... And the perpetrator was not implying that they were the perpetrator.
Exactly.
That was a funny skit.
Okay.
Well, that is about it.
I feel like that was pretty good. That was a good little overview. Really quickly, I want to know, when your daughter got her period, did you celebrate? Did you make a little period party?
We did. And that is, we did have, I got her gifts. My sister also, who's younger than I am, I got gifts for her. But I wanted it to be very different than the reception that I got when I got my period, which was not so favorable.
Yeah.
And it wasn't my fault. It was due. It was overdue.
Yeah.
But no, when my daughter, I was like, this is awesome. And we did have our own little celebration with some small gifts and I don't even remember if it was ice cream or what it was. But
I love that so much. It makes me so happy.
I think that's really important because this is celebrating that person's transition. And so whoever the person is, and it's something that's happening to you. And even if you are a person who wishes they didn't have that happen and really doesn't feel like they are of the female persuasion, it's a celebration because you are progressing physiologically and you can make changes to be who you really are, but it's not a curse. And
I do want to give a shout out to my sister who was there when I got my period because she was just begrudgingly had to be there. I was like, oh my God, because if you're a person who doesn't bleed, you may not realize that when you first get your period, it's not necessarily bright red, obvious. So it was kind of brownish. And I was like, what's happening? Because I knew a period was going to be blood. And I was like, what is this weird sludge? And she was like, oh, all right, it's your period. And she's like, here's a pad. And I'm like, I remember her handing it to me and I was kind of looking at it and she was like, all right. And she unfolded it and helped me line it up in my underwear, and that's huge. That's so important, because you need someone to kind of show you the ropes and shout out Love you, Emily.
Yeah, to be so do I. Yeah, to be celebratory is really important, I think, just because it has the period has so many negative connotations throughout our society and other parts of the world. So
Absolutely.
it makes us who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Self-Care Corner. How have we shown ourselves love in the past few weeks?
Yeah. So I think for me, I talked on one of our other microsodes about kind of coming to terms with a lot of my anxiety issues and focusing on that and getting, I'd already been doing therapy, getting medicated, and how wonderful that was for me. I'm going to say coming to terms with things that have been previously uncomfortable and being okay with it. So I've allowed myself to let go of some relationships and some associations that I'd been in that never sat right. And some that I've been kind of struggling with. And one that just came up, and I will just briefly, touch on it. I had been talking a little bit about, I've talked before about how I love music. I go to a lot of concerts, and that's usually my stress relief. And so obviously during the pandemic, there hasn't really been that. And I've been very close to, always the band Hanson, but what I found was during the pandemic and during, sort of the other, the social justice pandemic that we talk about as well, I found myself a little disappointed in their lack of overwhelming support for either cause.
The two pandemics.
Right.
And there are more pandemics, but these two are prevalent for
because
us
they
right
were
now.
very huge to me. And so for the first time in a long time, it didn't align, and it was really, really hard for me to let go of that. And it's been almost a year where I haven't really listened to their music because it just hasn't sat. I don't feel like it, and it doesn't mean the same as it did once to me. And having to sort of let go of that has been really scary because it's been a part of who I am
Since you were young.
Yeah.
And you've been, I don't know if you want to share that you've been sort of prior to this, you were going to
tons of concerts all over the
concerts.
world. Yeah, I have one that I actually paid for before the pandemic, so I will still go to that. But, I have friends and I have relationships, and I realize that those can still exist, and I can still appreciate it and be involved in some ways, but I don't need to be as deeply in it as I was because it just doesn't work for me anymore. So realizing that something doesn't work for me, even though it's scary, and kind of working through that is good. And shout out to all the amazing bands and artists out there who have been so supportive to all these incredibly important movements, including, now, supporting the Asian population. Because I think if you have a voice and you have the privilege, you have to use it.
Have to use it.
I'm sorry, I do. So
I agree. That's part of, someone said to me, I have a really good friend who always says to me, and she taught this to her children, to those to whom much is given, much is expected. And so why would you not stand up for all of these people and these issues?
Well, I think there's this big movement where people think that those things are political. And again, I think that's where the problem lies from because it's not political. It's humanitarian.
It is. It's about humans.
Yeah. And honestly, not to harp on Hanson, but they're a band that always talks about how they were brought up on 60s, pop music. And they talk about Chuck Berry and the Jackson 5 and all these influential artists in their lives. They do a cover of Chain of Fools and all these beautiful, strong Black people that have helped them get where they are.
Sure.
And I haven't seen a big support for Black Lives Matter. And it's so that just was the piece that I was like, ooh,
yeah,
that is a disconnect. So anyway, we'll see. Maybe they'll come around. But for now, I know it's not working. So that's it.
I appreciate you. Appreciate you for sharing that and for maturing. And for maturing. My self-care has been, this is something that my therapist taught me, and I'm going to give a shout out to therapists. Yes, I am a woman of color who sees a therapist, and I think that that's really important. It makes my life better and happier and lighter. And I constantly encourage people to do it if you have issues in your life that are weighing you down. But she taught me something, and I have to give a shout out to a friend. Her daughter is just found out that she got matched. Well, a shout out to her daughter. To a program in New York, and she's going to be a psychiatrist.
Awesome.
And I think it's really important that people see folks that look like themselves as their care providers. And so that's a big deal. You know, it's not sexy like some of the other specialties.
Yeah.
But I think she's going to do really good work, and especially as a woman of color.
That's amazing.
So yeah,
Yep.
Congratulations, Alex. So my thing is the container. And so my therapist taught me that there's a way of when we can't confront every issue that's bothering us in the moment. Usually we say pick your spots, but even just as good or better than picking your spots is to put it in the container. And so I conjured up in my head this container. It's very beautiful, and it's lined, and it's, you know, the top lid is painted, something that opens and closes, and you can put a lock on it. But it also has a spigot so that you can let some things out a little bit at your own pace if you'd like to release anything. And so when I can't get into a fight with someone about something, or they don't understand what I'm trying to do and it's making me anxious or upset, or if it's some historical issue that happened to me that I'm flashing back on her and I can't deal with it because I'm in the middle of seeing a patient or whatever, I put it in the container. Put it in the container and close the lid. Some things are huge. They have to be dealt with help. And other things are just really tiny, just like that's a nuisance. And people say, "You're so chill," because I put it in the container. I'll get back to it later. And I might have to get back to you later too. But for now, it's in there, and it's safe, and it isn't forgotten, but it isn't also causing me any kind of burden in that moment.
That is huge. I'm literally going to use that. So thank you so much for sharing, because that is brilliant.
Yeah. And so, you just kind of in your head conjure up what that container looks like. And I have a really beautiful one. It's wood. It's heavy wood. And in my mind, and that's where my stuff goes, because it's important stuff. It's not just some flimsy little box. It's something beautiful where I'm going to store good, bad, and ugly in that little space, and I can go back and visit it later. So that's been my self-care. I've been working hard on my container this week and on addressing, issues by putting them in the container.
Amazing. So. Love it.
Well, it's been great being with you guys again. We'd like to thank Baobab Tree Studios, our friends, family, and all of you who make this podcast possible.
Please be sure to subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, Android, and iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the Midwife Crisis Podcast, or email us at midwifecrisispodcast@gmail.com.
Until the next time.
For those about to bleed, we salute you.
And for those who are no longer bleeding, hallelujah.
Bye.
Adios.